Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I've put together a collection of 5 spring and Easter thrift flips. For my project, I'm going to be using this hardcover book that I thrifted. I'm going to open it up to the center and then I'm going to create a glue and water mixture. I'm pouring out some of my Sealy's Quickset wood glue into a plastic container. I'm then adding some water. So probably I would say 2 parts glue to 1 part water. And then I'm going to go around and add that mixture to my entire book. I am going to make sure that I'm getting it on all the edges of the pages, on the top and on the bottom. And then once I've done that, I'm actually going to take the glue again and apply it directly to those very same areas. Now, this is not my first altered book that I've done. I've done 2 Christmas ones of these. Some of you have probably even tried this craft, and I could not resist making one for spring, and I'm definitely going to be doing one for Easter as well. These are so fun to make. So you can see I'm applying that glue to the edges of the pages as well. This is going to give them a sort of crinkled, worn look. I'm also applying my glue and water mixture to the book pages itself that are facing up at me, and I'm going to repeat this process a few times. I'm then going to take my hot glue gun and I'm going to stagger my book pages and glue them together in sections. Now this is going to create a sort of opened book look here, like it's been opened to these pages and sort of sat there over time. And I'm not going to glue each and every single one of those pages together. You don't have to, because we've added that watered down glue mixture. It really will all hold together nicely. I'm then going to add some more of my water and glue mixture to the corner, and I'm going to use a paintbrush to curl my pages over. Now, how far you go with this and how many you curl is up to you. I just want a hint of age. After curling my pages, I also added a little bit of hot glue behind each one to further secure them in place. Next, I'm going to use my size 10 Eco brush and apply 2 coats of Dixie Belle's Buttercream Chalk Mineral Paint to cover the entire book, including the front covers. For this project, I'm going to be using the La Blanche Spring Birds Mould and Redesign's Aviary Mould. If you're in Australia, you can grab both of these molds off my website. After dusting the mold with cornstarch, I'm going to start working some clay into the Spring Birds mold. I first of all want to cast this lovely bird that sits amongst the florals. So I'm just working in sections, pulling back any excess clay. Then I'm going to flex the mold and then flip it over, and I'm going to let gravity help me get the design out. Now, it doesn't matter if I have little bits breaking off because I can always glue them back into place. I'm then going to flip it over and apply a generous amount of glue to the back, spreading it out with my fingers. And then I'm going to position this casting in the top left-hand corner. I'm then going to cast some more of the florals from the Spring Bird mold. Again, flipping it over. Gravity definitely is a big help here. And then I'm gluing that in place near our first casting. I'm then going to cast this little leaf. This is an individual leaf. This is quite a buildable design, so you can see I'm just piecing it together. I'm then going to use Redesign's Aviary Mould, and I'm working the clay into the larger design here that has the branches and the florals. And then again, flipping it over and gently curling that mold back to release my casting. After adding glue to the back of this casting, I'm going to position it in the bottom right-hand corner of my design. Now, I did think about adding this little nest here. I will link it below. I just had it there as a bit of a guide, but in the end, I do end up making my own because the scale was a little bit off. I'm here just casting a branch from the Aviary mold, and I'm setting that to one side. I'm then going back to the Spring Birds design there and casting some more florals. You see that I do switch back and forth between the 2 molds. I really like to have different scales of castings to choose from. It definitely helps to build a more realistic looking scene. Next, I'm going to cast each of the birds in the Redesign mold to work out which ones are going to work and to make sure that the book's not going to feel a bit too crowded. On this particular day, I was dealing with very hot weather, so I did have a few sections that broke off my castings, but that's okay. You can see I'm just gluing down my little bird, and then I'll glue down the tail separately. I'm then going to cast some more florals from the Aviary Mould, and I'm going to position that in the top right hand corner. You can see I just have the nest there as a bit of a guide while I'm working out placement. I'm then gluing the little swooping bird underneath that greenery. I'm then going to cast a single flower here and there to add. I added the branch that I cast from earlier, and then I also cast some more of the florals and added that to the branch. So you can see I'm mixing and matching the different sections from my two molds, and I'm adding individual leaves here and there as well to fill in the scene. I'm also going to cast quite a few of the design from the Aviary mold that has the leaves. Again, this is helping to fill in the scene and add interest and balance, and I love when molds have these smaller elements that you can cast to really build your scene and customize. Now I need to make my nest, so I've rolled up a bit of clay. I've used the end of a paintbrush to make a little hole in the center, and then I just used my fingers to shape it, and now I'm using a palette knife to put some little grooves and lines in the clay to make it look more like a realistic nest. After gluing it in place, I then used some clay rolled up to make some little eggs to go inside. After I finished gluing my castings down, I let them dry overnight. The next day I came in with a base coat of Paint Couture's Farmhouse linen, and I went over the top of the entire design. I decided on this color because it was nice and bright and a really great base for adding the colors that I'm going to be working with today. I then let it dry. Next, I want to add a background of some sky, so I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Queen's Court paint. I started off adding it and then decided to add a bit of the Farmhouse linen to that Queen's Court to create a few different tones to work with here. So this is a bit of a lighter blue. So we're trying to create a sky in the background here, so I'm going to be working with a few different tones, and I also did bring in my mister as well to help thin out that paint and almost give it a bit of a watercolor look, because this is just the background. We're going to be building on top of that. I did want it to be quite a soft look here. So I'm going to be repeating the same process, adding the different tones of blue, using my mister to water it down, and then I did also grab a wet wipe as well to give it more of sort of a mottled look, to pull back some of that paint, almost like there's some clouds in the sky. Next, I decided I wanted a similar look down the bottom, so I'm using Paint Couture's Basil chalk paint and also the Farmhouse linen chalk paint to have a few different tones of green. I toyed with the idea of actually painting in some leaf shapes. You can see I'm sort of having a play with that here, but in the end I decided to go for a more subtle look like the sky, and we're going to be working with those different green tones but also mixing them and having them look a bit mottled like the sky, so it's a bit less intense, and so that the molds can really be the star of the show and not the background. So I'm going to continue adding that greenery down in the bottom section of the book. If you're going to give this a try and you don't want to be playing around with paints in the background, another option could be for you to use some sort of a decoupage design underneath your molds to start off with, instead of going to this trouble. I wanted this more of a subtle look here. I wanted to build my own background as opposed to finding something that would suit this perfectly, but that is definitely an option if you don't want to go to the bother of creating your own background. When that was dry, I took Paint Couture's Pinecone and Pitch Black chalk paints, and I'm taking a little bit of the Pinecone out and also some of that black paint and mixing them together to create a darker brown. We're going to be using this to go over the top of our little bird. I wanted these to have a more natural look, nothing too bright and over the top. I wanted this to be a pretty simple scene with the birds where the florals are the more colourful aspect of the design. So I'm just laying down that darker brown first, and I'm also adding a little bit to the head of the bird as well, and I'm just going to continue to paint each of them. The birds on this side of the book are going to be painted very similarly. The one on the left I'm going to add a bit more colour. I added a bit of white paint to my palette there and just used the same brush that I'd been using with the brown, so I've got a bit of a lighter brown there that I'm now coming in with on the rest of the bird. I also added some of that lighter colour over the top of the darker brown sections, and I like how this is catching the detail there. And then I'm using some of the pitch black chalk paint to go over the beak and the eyes of the bird. I then went in with some of the white farmhouse linen and did a few little speckles here and there. Next, I'm going to start adding some of the Basil chalk paint to the leaves on the branches under the bird, and I also grabbed some of that farmhouse linen to create some different tones of green. Then I'm using that same dark brown paint that we created on the branches. And I also layered in some of that lighter paint as well. Next, on the flowers, I'm going to use Berry Rouge by Paint Couture and Ballet Slipper from their Luxe Metallic line. I'm starting with the Berry Rouge, that's the darker metallic, and I'm adding that here and there on the flowers. That's going to be our darker tone. And then once I'm finished adding that to certain sections of the flowers before it's completely dry, I'm going to come in with Ballet Slipper and start layering that on top of it as well. And I just love how when this happens, the colors sort of mix together and create a more natural looking paint finish. So I'm going to continue to do that to the little flowers down the bottom. While that's still wet, I'm going to use Oyster Pearl by Paint Couture, and I'm going to put some of that Luxe Metallic in the center of each of the flowers. When that was dry, I took some of the Basil chalk paint and added it to the center of the flowers. I then used some more of that darker brown paint and I added it to the nest that we created. I tried to not get that paint on the little eggs, but I was able to wipe off certain sections where I'd made a few errors. I also added in some of that Pinecone chalk paint over the top for some tonal difference. I then repeated the same process for our bird that was swooping down, the same as I had done on the bird below. I then moved on to the greenery and florals up the top and repeated the same process as we did below. If I've inspired you to try any of these Paint Couture products, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Once my paint was completely dry, I took a paintbrush and added a little bit of the farmhouse linen, then wiped it off, and then I went in and did some dry brushing over the top of our casting. So this is going to soften a lot of the colors and just give it more of a sort of faded vintage look. I'm going to repeat the same process up the top. I obviously have not painted the left-hand side just yet, but I was definitely playing around and experimenting with colors on the right-hand side first. Moving on to the left-hand side, and you'll be able to see that I definitely repeated a lot of the same processes as I did on the right-hand side. Got a little bit of the red in the section where I shouldn't have, so I just wiped some of that off. So I'm really just sort of repeating the same patterns there to make it look like they're sitting in sort of the same tree, but obviously the florals are at different stages of growth. So I'm going to continue to add those lovely lighter pinks, and then I'm coming in with the Basil chalk paint over the top of the greenery. After the greenery had dried, I then came in with some more of that darker brown mix that we'd made earlier, and I'm adding it to the branches. You can see I also swap to the Pinecone chalk paint that we used as our base as well, because obviously branches don't have all the exact same tone. So definitely trying to think about how these things would appear in real life. On the bird on the left, I'm using some more of the Queen's Court mineral paint, and I'm going to paint over the entire bird, excluding the feet and the beak, of course. And then once I had done that, I did then decide to come in with a little bit of white, just layering in a little bit of a lighter tone there. And then I also grabbed Paint Couture's Goldmine Luxe Metallic, and I just brushed a few little sort of flecks here and there into the bird's feathers there, just as a pop of lovely colour, a little bit of brightness, a little bit of something different. Next, I'm using pitch black chalk paint on the bird's feet and also on the beak and obviously the eye. When my paint is dry, I'm going to come in and do some more of that white dry brushing, just like we did on the right-hand side. I love how this simple technique not only softens the look, but it also brings out the details in these beautiful castings. Once my paint has dried, I'm going to take this script stamp, I'm adding some IOD black ink, and I'm going to randomly press it in random areas on my book so that it looks like writing that has faded from the background. And once I've done that, I'm taking a wet wipe and I'm going to wipe back some of the intensity of that ink. I am next then going to take a stamp from IOD's Antiquities stamp, and I'm going to press that just in the top left hand corner, and again I'm just going to wipe back some of the intensity of that ink. I'm then going to take Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1, and I'm going to dab and stipple that over the entire background of the book. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to highlight every area with Crackle, but I want the option. Now I'm going to then let this dry for about an hour. When it's ready for the next step, it will feel sticky and tacky to the touch, so I can come in with step 2, and I'm repeating the same process, dabbing and stippling that all over. After I had finished applying this step 2, I let the crackle dry overnight. The next day, I came in with Paint Couture's Light Brown Sugar Glaze, and I'm going to be applying it in certain sections. I'm really bringing out that lovely crackle that we added, but I'm also working it into the details of the castings. I'm even going over the top of those, but you can see I'm coming in pretty quick with a wet wipe to wipe back any excess that I don't want or any areas where I feel like it's built up a bit too much. My vision for this book as I was making it was that perhaps it was some sort of a nature book with birds and flowers in it, and maybe that's what the script is in the background, but it's sort of come alive for the reader. I know that might sound a little bit funny, but I like to have these sort of visions in my mind as I'm making things to help me to create them. Let me know in the comments if you do something similar, if you sort of create a backstory or something like that for whatever you're creating. Remember, if you don't have access to this particular glaze, you could create a paint wash out of a brown paint, or you could use an antiquing wax. Just remember to put down a clear coat of wax or a clear coat before you do this. After applying it to the front of the book, I also added it to the edges as well. Next, I'm going to use some of Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic. I've got a little bit on a small artist brush, and I'm just going to add it to the center of my flowers. Now I've already got that green there. I'm not completely obscuring it. I just want to highlight that and have a pop of that beautiful bronze tone. When that's dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Oyster Pearl. I'm getting a little bit on my finger, and I'm just going to go over the top of the leaf details. Just a little bit of shine added to those areas. Next, I'm going to take a little makeup sponge and I'm going to put some of that Bronze Luxe Metallic on it, and I'm going to run that bronze over the top of the page edges. When that was dry, to finish it off, I took some chiffon ribbon and I'm going to attach it to the center as a page holder. So I'm just working out where I'm going to position it, and then I'm going to add some hot glue to the top there and sort of just poke that ribbon through. And then I'm going to cut off the excess down the bottom and sort of pull and fray at the edges. I then took the wet wipe that I was using for the glaze and I'm just running that over the top of the ribbon, and you can see how that is sort of staining and giving the chiffon ribbon more of an antiqued look. And here's our finished spring book. I had a lot of fun making this project and being able to use the beautiful molds by Redesign and La Blanche. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. For my next project, I'm going to be using some more peat pots. I have 3 there, and I'm going to paint each of these with Paint Couture's Buttercream inside and out. When my paint was dry, I took some napkins that I got from TK Maxx and I'm going to peel off the additional layers on the back because we're going to be using this to decoupage with. I really want to have that sweet little bee in the center of my pot, so I'm going to tear out a square of that napkin that has that design on it, and then I also tore at the edges to give them a rough edge, as I feel that rough edges work a little bit better when you are joining pieces together. I'm then going to use Paint Couture's Decoupage Medium in matte. I'm laying down some product where I want my design to go, and then I'm going to lay my napkin over the top and start adding some product over the top of that and really working that into the design. I came to this point and realized that the little stripes on the side weren't really looking right. One of them looked a little bit wonky, so at this point I did then decide to tear off the design on the left there. And then I was able to reposition it a little bit straighter. I also then tore off and repositioned the stripe on the right. I did have to tear off a little bit of that excess napkin because it would have gone over the top of our little bee design. So I tore that off, and then when I repositioned it, I did notice that there was a little gap where you could see a bit more of the peat pot underneath than I wanted. So I just tore off a little bit of excess napkin from up the top there and layered that over the top. For the back portion of our pot, I just tore off some of the plain parts of the napkin, so we don't want any more stripes on the pot, and I just started adding that to the pot and almost sort of collaging in any gaps. And then I came in and started tearing off the excess from the base of our pot. I sealed those up with some more of our decoupage medium and repeated the same step for the top of the pot. Now we can move on to the other pots. I'm going to be using part of the napkin that we just used and Redesign's Easter stamp. I'm inking up one of the designs and I'm going to press it down on the napkin. And I'm going to be also picking another couple of designs from that same stamp and also adding them to the napkin. Basically, we're creating our own decoupage designs to use. You can't really stamp directly onto peat pots, you won't get a clear image. I then took my hairdryer and heat set each of our stamped designs. Next, I'm going to tear around the first image that we're going to use. I'm going to lay down some decoupage medium on my pot, and then I'm going to position our first little stamp design over the top, and I'm going to press down. I'm then going to take my brush and use that to smooth it down. You can see I've got a little bit of product on there to seal it all in, and then I'm going to repeat the same process for the other pot. Definitely keep this technique in mind for your future projects. You can also stamp over the top of tissue paper, and that way you can create your own decoupaged designs. While my pots are drying, I'm going to take a medium-sized egg and I'm going to apply some of my Buttercream chalk paint by Paint Couture. It's going to take 2 coats to get the coverage that I want. And then once that's dry, I'm going to lay down a layer of Paint Couture's Decoupage medium in matte, and we're going to take that sweet little bunny that we stamped and we're going to add that to the egg. I'm just smoothing it down with my fingers, and then just like we did before, I'm going to take my brush with a little bit of product on it. I'm going to go over the top of that design to seal it all in. Next, I'm going to take some smaller eggs and I'm going to add some Buttercream chalk paint to each of those. These are going to go in our little pots. Once they are dry, I'm going to water down some of my light brown sugar antiquing glaze. I'm going to then use a fan brush, and I'm going to take that watered down glaze mixture and I'm going to do some speckles on our egg just by tapping over the top. I then also took some of our watered down glaze and I added it to each of the 2 pots that we added our stamped napkin to, and I am dabbing off some of the excess, but I'm not putting any of that glaze on our stamped image that we put on the napkins. I want there to almost be like a halo around it. I also then added some of that watered down glazed mixture to the little egg that we added our tissue paper design onto. And once I'd covered the entire thing, I also did a few little speckles on that as well. So that I don't have to use too much of my forest moss, I'm going to stuff some leftover napkins into the base of the pot. I'm then going to add some of my hot glue over the top of it, and then I'm going to start adding some of that forest moss into the pot. I then added some hot glue to the base of our little speckled eggs that we created earlier, and I'm just going to glue them in. I'm going to repeat the same process for our other design that we added the napkin piece to, and then I'm going to take another one of those little nests that I've been using that I got online. I'm just sort of pulling it apart to make it a bit wider. I'm going to add some hot glue to the forest moss in the center there and glue that down, and then I'm going to add some glue to the base of our decoupaged egg and glue that in. Next, I'm going to take my hot glue gun and I'm going to add a little bit of glue around the rim of my pot, and I'm going to start adding some twine. So I've just added that over the top of the glue. I'm going to wind it around the top a little, add a little bit more glue, and then add one more little bit of glue there just to hold it in place. And then I'm going to continue winding that twine around the top of the pot about 3 times, just using the glue that's already there to keep it in place. I then cut my twine and glued the end piece in place. I'll repeat the same process for each of the pots. Next, I'm going to create a bow. I'm going to wind some twine around 3 of my fingers about 5 or 6 times. I'm going to cut off the twine, leaving a little bit of length. I'm then going to wind that excess length around the center, trim off the excess, and glue it in place. This is just a simple little bow. I'm just going to glue that down so that it doesn't come apart. And then I'm going to add some glue to the back of the bow and glue it on our pot. I'll also add this to our other stamped design. For our pot with the bee napkin on it, I've just doubled over some twine. I'm going to make 2 loops, then pull those together and tie a knot. I'm then going to cut off the little loop down the bottom there so we have 2 tails the same, and then I'm going to glue that into position. And here are our finished pots. This was such a fun and easy project. Let me know if you had a favorite pot out of these 3 and what you think of these in the comments. final project, I'm going to be working on this sweet little ceramic bird. I loved the shape, but I did not love the color, and someone had actually drawn on it, I think, with markers. So we're going to give it an update. I still had some of my Pinecone and salt wash mixture left over, so I'm going to just be applying that directly over the top of my project. Now I have cleaned this. If you are worried about adhesion, I definitely recommend that you use Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer. Often I do that, but I find that salt wash really does allow your paint to stick really well to most surfaces. I didn't have any issues, but if you are a bit worried, definitely pop that primer down first. I'm just going to be applying 1 coat of the salt wash mixture over the top to create some texture. I let my project dry overnight, and the next day I came in with Paint Couture's Abundance Mineral Paint, and I'm applying this over the top, but I'm allowing my brush to skip over certain areas to allow that Pinecone salt wash mixture to peek through, almost like perhaps it's rust. I only ended up doing 1 coat of this, and this does have a built-in top coat, so I could have just left it at this, but we are going to be trying something a little bit different on this project. I'm just going to let this dry completely first before we move on. When the paint was dry, I took out IOD's Petite Fleur Pink Paint Inlay, and I'm going to be adding this design to my little bird. However, the shape isn't exactly right for what I want. I want it draping around the neck of the bird, so I'm going to be trimming it into pieces so that I can make it work for the project that I have. I'm also going to be trimming out that excess paper so that the inlay will sit a bit better. Once I had it to the point that I thought was going to work, I decided to cut it just a little bit more into a couple more smaller pieces so I could adjust the angle. I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Extreme Garden Satin with my paint inlays today. I'm applying a nice generous coat in the area where the inlay is going to go. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to be placing that inlay design side down into my wet clear coat, and I'm just going to smooth that down with my fingers and being careful not to move the design. I don't want it to move. And once I've got that down, I'm going to add a little bit more product down the bottom just to make sure that I have that there, because inlays have to be put into either wet clear coat or some sort of paint. I'm then going to apply some more on the right hand side there and then put the other part of the inlay there, and then I'm going to repeat the same process on the other side so that we can continue that paint inlay design up around the bird's neck. Once that's in position, I'm going to be applying some more of that satin clear coat, but I'm going to be adding it to the back part of the bird, and I'm going to be positioning the other part of that inlay that we cut off on the back there. Once I have that pressed down and in place, I'm going to take out my water mister and lightly mist the inlays on the front and the back. This helps to activate those paint pigments. I'm using a wet wipe to apply a bit of pressure and to move that water around. I then let that dry completely. It took about half an hour, and then once it's dry, I'm going to mist it again. This is going to help that paint inlay to release. So I'm misting it. I'll then use a wet wipe to sort of dab at that water, work it into the paint inlay, and then after about 30 seconds, I will begin to pull that away. I'm removing the inlay slowly and gently. If you feel any resistance, add a little bit more water and give it a little bit more time. But as you can see, these are coming away really nicely, and this already looks very sweet in my opinion. Now I could have left it here, but I want this to have more of a hand-painted look. So I'm going to mist the design and reactivate the paint pigments, and then I'm going to go in with a small paintbrush, and I'm going to just sort of dab at those paint pigments, spread them around a little bit, change the shape a little bit, just to give it more of a hand-painted sort of vintage, almost folk art sort of look. And I'm just going to continue doing that to each of the different sections of the inlay, because the paint pigments can be reactivated by water, and I really love this look. I did it on a decorative book in a previous video as well, and I just think it's such a fun look and a really great way to customize your projects. Now obviously, if this look wasn't for you, you really liked the more perfect look of the inlay before this step, you can obviously just leave this out. If you don't have paint inlays, you could always try hand painting on some little florals, or you could use transfers or add some stamps and then sort of paint those. There's lots of different possibilities with this look if you want to add some florals to your home decor. Once I was finished, I took my wet wipe and sort of dabbed at the paint to sort of pull back a little bit and give it a bit more of a vintage and worn feel. Once that paint was dry, I took out my Extreme Garden Satin and I'm going to lightly brush over some more of that clear coat to seal it in. Now, obviously, this can reactivate the pigment, so if you're worried about that, you could use a spray sealer instead. When that was dry, I took out my brush that I was using with Van Dyke Brown in the previous project, and I'm going to be applying that over the top of the bird and wiping back the excess. I don't have any extra glaze on my brush. I'm just using what was left over and then wiping it back. I'm loving how the glaze is capturing the texture of the salt wash, and it's giving this bird a really fun vintage look. If this was a little bit too grungy for you, you could leave this step out, or you could come in with a whitewash or a white wax to lighten it up instead. And here's our finished bird decor. I think this turned out really sweet. It was just an added bit of pop of color, some florals, perfect for spring and summer. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. Project really is a bit of a trash to treasure project. I found this toolbox for a few dollars at the thrift store. I'm applying some White Night spray paint in Mocha. I decided to do this because it did have some stains and things on there that I thought would be best covered up with the spray paint as opposed to a different primer. Here's how it's looking at the moment. I also did the inside as well. I'm then going to use Paint Couture's Duck Egg chalk paint over the entire piece. I end up doing 2 coats of this beautiful blue. If I inspire you to try any of the Paint Couture products used in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. When you're painting a toolbox, you definitely need to think about all of the different sections that are involved with a piece like this. For example, when you're doing the sides, you need to make sure that you open it up and get underneath the sections where it would be hidden by the lid. You definitely need to do the back. Ultimately, you're painting the entire outside. I didn't paint the inside of mine because I thought it looked really tidy with the spray paint without that. I'm also painting over the top of the handle and the hardware so that it's all sort of a cohesive look, and I am also going to be layering some other colors over the top as well. So here you can see I've opened the lid and I'm just going along and making sure I've got all those areas that I might have missed because the lid was closed. When my 2 coats of Duck Egg chalk paint are completely dry, I took out IOD's Ephemeral Melange Transfer, and I'm going to be using this beautiful rose design here. I think the colors go beautifully with that Duck Egg blue. So I'm just removing the transfer, and here I'm just going to be lining it up to work out how much of the design is going to be on the top there. I'm going to have some of it coming over the edge as well, but I am going to trim off the text that's down the bottom, and just below the rose we will be repositioning those into a different section. I'm then going to be peeling off the backing part of the transfer and then positioning that transfer design on top of my toolbox. The grid lines really are a great help here so that you can try and get it straight. When I'm happy with that, I'm going to press down and then use the transfer tool that comes in the pack to just go over the top of the entire design to start off with, especially down in the bottom right hand corner where you can see there is a dint in the toolbox. I don't mind the dint. I think that adds to the vintage charm of it, but I do need to make sure that I'm working that transfer in. I'm then picking a corner, and you can see I'm lifting that plastic as I'm rubbing to see if the design has transferred. If it hasn't, I just put it back down and continue. This can be a little bit time consuming when there's lots of thin letters, so just definitely take your time. And I'm just going to continue rubbing until I have the entire transfer down. When it comes time to go over the edges, I do flip the toolbox up a little bit, and I'm also making some little cuts so that I can pull that transfer over the lip and have the design sort of flowing down the side. Once I have the transfer down, I'm going to use part of that carrier sheet to rub and burnish it further. I'm then going to be using some of the text that we cut off on the bottom section of the toolbox. You can see I haven't quite finished doing the handle. We're going to be using a different color there. So I'm just repeating the same steps as we did up above, just rubbing until I have that text transferred. I also took that smaller piece of text and applied that just to the left of the roses. For the handle and the lock mechanism there, I'm using Paint Couture's Farmhouse linen chalk paint. I ended up doing 3 coats. I don't need this to be perfect. I'm happy for some of that blue to show through, and even some of that mocha spray paint, that's fine. We're going for a vintage rustic look here. So I'm just going to be painting over the handle and also, as I said, the little locking mechanism as well. I went with white here because obviously the floral transfer is already the main focal point. It's absolutely gorgeous. I don't want to take away from it, but if you wanted, you could come in with a metallic at this stage and give it a bit of a pop of shine if that was something that might go with your decor. When the paint was dry, I used Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin, and I applied 2 coats over the entire outside of the toolbox to seal everything in. And here's a look at our finished project. This was definitely a trash to treasure makeover, and it is amazing what Paint Couture paint and IOD transfers can do. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. First project, I'm going to be working on this oval frame that I thrifted. Now, I believe it is a resin piece. I'm going to take out the glass and the backer, and then I'm going to be using IOD's new Felicite Mould. I'm going to dust the designs that I want to use with cornstarch. That's going to help my clay to release. And then I am going to be using some dust air dry clay. Now, the Felicite molds are a lot deeper than the other IOD molds, and so you are going to use a little bit more clay, but the detail is amazing. I'm just going to gently bend it over the curved edge of the frame. You want to do this before your castings have dried and set, because they might break and crumble. So I'm just going to be casting these smaller rose designs. I don't want them to be super deep. I think that might look a little bit odd on the frame, but ultimately what we're trying to create is a floral frame. So I'm going to be really sort of filling the outside of the frame with these beautiful roses. I didn't sort of go into this with a specific plan, but as I started to cast the molds, I was doing multiples of some and trying to sort of mirror the design down the bottom, up the top, and left and right, and just sort of fill in any areas that looked really blank with some of the smaller floral designs. So like here, for example, I'm casting a single rose, which is perfect for filling in any of those other gaps. This mold is definitely a new favorite because there are so many different sized florals. So this design here that I've just cast is a lot shallower, it's smaller in scale. Then they also have these 2 little leaves, perfect for filling in gaps. So there's definitely so many designs to choose from when you're using this mold. And for today's project, that's definitely going to be handy as I am filling up the outside of this frame. Now I am using clay for this because I need something that is going to be malleable, something that I can really mold to the surface that I'm working on. You could use resin, but again, that's going to probably be a little bit expensive because of how many we are casting. It'll be a bit of a longer process. So I think clay is definitely the way to go for a project like this. For the sections up the top and down the bottom, I'm going to be casting this larger rose design. I thought that would be nice to have a bigger floral piece up the top and down the bottom to sort of draw the eye. And with these, I am also going to allow some of the leaves to sort of poke out and give it a little bit more of interest and shape. So I definitely was having a bit of fun with this and how I was able to lay these molds. I've sped up the rest of the footage for you because I was making multiples of each of the floral designs and then obviously gluing them down. I used a strong wood glue for that, and this is definitely something that you could do on any type of frame project or mirror. It's definitely an easy way to update a frame and take it to the next level. I glued all my castings down and let them dry overnight, and the next day I came in with Paint Couture's French Rose Mineral Paint, and I am going to be applying 2 coats. The second coat was really a lot lighter and more about me getting into the crevices around the roses. And again, I really love how detailed these are, so I'm trying not to use too much paint. I don't want to fill in those details. And I really thought that this beautiful soft pink was perfect for using with these castings, given all those beautiful floral details. So I'm just going to work my way around, applying that beautiful soft pink, that French rose over the entire frame. If you like something a little bit more neutral, obviously you could come in with a cream or some sort of a white paint. Or given that we are approaching Halloween crafting time, you could come in with a black and make this a bit more of a sort of gothic style frame. The Paint Couture mineral paint has a built-in sealer, so that was very handy for the next step. So I let that dry completely, and then I came in with Paint Couture's light brown sugar glaze. And I'm going to be using a chip brush. I'm using this so that I can really work that glaze into the details, into the space in between the florals, so that it will lay in those low points. And when I come in with a wet wipe, I am able to allow that glaze to still sit down in the details. It's highlighting all of those. I'm also using a mister at times to help that glaze move as well. I'm going to continue to work in sections, adding the glaze and then wiping it back. If I take too much back, like I sometimes do on the flatter sections, I'm able to add a little bit more with my brush and be a little bit gentler with wiping it back. And now if this is a little bit too grungy, obviously you could leave this step out, or maybe you could come in with a whitewash or some white wax. I was going for a vintage look. I do love being able to add the antiquing glaze. I just think that it gives a piece a lot more character, but obviously you can leave this step out. If you don't have access to an antiquing glaze, you could use a brown wax or you could use a brown paint wash. Once the glaze was completely dry, I decided to take out the brush I had used with the French rose to start off with. I'm offloading most of that paint, and now I'm doing some dry brushing over the high points. I just want to bring back some more of that beautiful soft pink, give it a little bit more of a light look on the tops of those details while still allowing that glaze to remain in the low points and really highlighting the details of these castings. Next, I'm going to work on what we're going to have in the middle. I really like the backing and the textured surface that's on this, so I'm really going to be highlighting that. I'm using Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint over the top. I'm allowing my brush to skip over some of those areas, and I just think this is such an interesting background. I didn't want to cover it up, so we're going to be using it. I ended up doing 2 light coats of this, and then when that was completely dry, I took out my Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in gloss, and I'm going to apply 1 coat. This is an uneven surface. I want to seal it up because I want to use a transfer over the top, and it's going to help to have a smooth surface like this for the transfer to cling to. When that was dry, I took out IOD's new Etiquettes Gilded Transfer Pack. I love this cottage design on the left-hand side there. So I am going to be cutting that out and we're going to be using that with our project today. Now you'll notice that on these transfers, there's a lot of background text, which is it's wonderful that they've included that, but I don't want to be using that. So I'm going to be trimming those off. I'm then going to work out where to put my transfer. This frame is very particular, so I didn't just want to stick it down and have the image be crooked. So I've put it down with the frame in place, and now I'm going to gently push that backing out with my transfer still in place, so I know that it's going to be in the exact spot that I want it. I'm then going to start rubbing the transfer down using the transfer stick that comes in the pack, and you'll see I'm really focusing just on the areas where the gilded design is. If you don't do this, you are going to get some extra little bits of that gold showing up. I definitely had that happen in the sections with the text. That really sort of can't be helped, unfortunately, but it often adds to the effect anyway. I don't need this to be perfect. So I'm just going to continue to work my way around the transfer, just rubbing in those areas where the actual design is. I'm not pressing too hard either, but I do have to keep in mind that this is an uneven surface, so I'm just going to go slow, and then I'm going to lift the transfer up and keep rubbing as I lift, checking each time that I have the design down. Definitely take your time with these beautiful gilded transfers. I find that they behave a little bit differently than other transfers in my experience. Next, I'm going to be sealing that up with another coat of that Gloss Extreme Guard top coat. I'm using gloss so that we can maintain that beautiful shine, and I'll be doing 2 coats. When that was dry, I was able to put that frame back in position. I'll be tidying up and removing any excess paint from the back of the frame with a wet wipe. And here's a look at our finished floral frame. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. The Felicite molds are absolutely stunning and they go so well with IOD's gilded transfers. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you enjoyed this video collection, and you can find the products used in this video on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share this out to a friend that you think might enjoy it.